So I remember the first journal entry that I uploaded. I said I was going to try to upload these frequently, but it's been almost a year since I last made that post. In my defense, I had some obstacles get in the way. One main obstacle was my computer. I was in desperate need of an upgrade, since anytime I opened up any software, I had about an hour to get any work done before my PC would overwork itself and crash. I had a friend who would help me with this sort of thing, but we had lost contact a while back, so I had to figure out how to fix a computer all on my own. For months, I had saved up to buy the right parts and looked up many tutorials on figuring out what was wrong with my computer. Eventually, with a lot of patience and prayers, I was able to get my computer working again. During that time, I would still manage to get some practice with sculpting the skull, and I felt that my skills with ZBrush had improved. The skulls that I was making, well, they still sucked, but I knew that I couldn't spend all of my time just focusing on making the perfect skull. I knew that I had to move on, and I could always come back to making a better skull if I improved my skills any further. So I moved on to sculpting the head. Before I go any further, I want to let everyone know that this video will be very short since there is this big gap from the first entry. Also, I would like to point out that these journal entries are not going to be to everyone's liking. I know this channel is known for video game content, and I'm expecting that once this video is uploaded that people will be leaving comments such as requests for certain video games. So at this time, I will be turning off comments for now. I don't expect these videos to get a lot of views, which is fine. This series of entries is mostly to keep myself in check with how far I'm coming along with my art. If my skills improve further, I do hope to create some art pieces that's related to video games, so this would be a good opportunity to start practicing. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's move on. My first attempts at sculpting the head were okay. Just like the skull, I had to make the head from a sphere instead of using a base mesh. I didn't like this method at first because I thought it was really tedious and I wanted to use the base mesh just to save some time. But I soon learned that starting from a sphere helps you understand the primitive shapes for the head. Once you get the shapes down, you then progress to another level of detail, and then another level until your sculpture looks like a head, or whatever it is that you're sculpting. There's nothing wrong with using a base mesh, especially if you're in the industry and need to save some time, but there is a lot of practice towards your muscle memory that you will be missing out on. I looked on YouTube for any head sculpting tutorials and started a routine of sculpting one head per day. Okay, that's a lie. Believe me, I tried to, I really did. It took me about 2 days or more to really finish a sculpture because I was focusing too much on getting my sculpt to match up with the artist's sculpt. But isn't that what you're supposed to do when you're following the tutorial? Well, yes, kind of. When you're starting out, it's fine to copy exactly what the artist is doing just to familiarize yourself with the workflow. But at some point, after some practice, you'll want to start getting out of your comfort zone and not go by what the tutorial is doing. What I mean by this is that there will be times where you need to start making sculptures on your own and see how much you've learned, and then you could go back to the tutorial to see where you made those mistakes so you won't repeat them. This is all textbook knowledge, I know. This is basic information you will learn at school. Well, unfortunately for me, I was not the best student, so I'm kind of relearning all of this on my own. So anyways, instead of sticking to one head for a long period of time, I had to move on to the next sculpt and try again. I had to break free from that perfectionist mindset. I needed to learn to catch the mistakes I was making with the current sculpt and make sure I wouldn't repeat them on the next one. At some point, after going through multiple sculptures, I would expand them out on the board and see how far my progress had been going. I did see improvement in my work. There were moments when I had finished a sculpture, I thought to myself, wow, this looks really good. I don't think I'll be able to make another sculpture that looks as good as this. But as I continue to make more sculptures, I would prove myself wrong and make a slightly better sculpture. There would be days where I would follow along with the tutorial, and there were other days where I would try to sculpt using only reference photos, and some days I would try to sculpt with only the knowledge that I had retained from these lessons. I started taking notes in between these sculpts and asked myself questions, such as, why is the head so difficult to sculpt? From my experience with sculpting and drawing, I've learned that the head has so many complicated shapes that are within one shape. You start off with a sphere, and you work your way into condensing this into a more complicated shape. From there, you start chipping away at this shape and add more shapes, and the whole project starts to get overwhelming. I think it's easier to draw because you only have to focus on getting the shape right for one view, but with sculpting, you have to make sure that every single nook and cranny looks right and that the proportions are correct. Otherwise, you end up with a big mess on your hands. When I started working on the second batch of heads, one thing that I took note of was that there were a lot of subtle features in the face. When you're creating the block out at the beginning, it's fine if everything looks very sharp and blocky, but after a while, you need to smooth out those features, and I noticed that my early sculptures were, well, not very subtle. So I tried to keep this in mind when making the second batch. They still needed work, but they were better than the first batch. I noticed some parts of the head that I had trouble with the most were the eyes and the mouth, so I had to look up some specific tutorials for these areas. With the third batch of sculptures, I did better. Some of the improvements were the shape of the head, some parts of the face were more defined, and I did manage to make some areas more subtle. there was still a lot that I needed to improve on. I definitely needed more practice, and I need to learn about the anatomy of the face to really understand what I'm sculpting. But overall, if you compare the recent sculpture to the first one, there is a lot of improvement, and I'm really eager to keep practicing to see how better I can get with these sculptures. But that's all I have for now. Again, I wanted to make this video really short just to get something out there and reduce the gap from the first entry. So thank you guys again so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you would like to keep up to date with more progress videos or other content that I'll be posting on this channel. As I mentioned before, comments will be turned off for now, but if these videos end up gaining some traction, I might end up opening the comment section again. Anyways, thanks again guys, and see you around. Bye bye.